I want to start off by apologizing for the major gap between videos. My kids are out of school for 2 months for the summer, and we're very active during this time. There's a lot of research that goes into my videos, and it's time consuming, and that's time I don't want to take away from my kids. Also, now that the kids are back in school and I do have more time, I have some openings as well. I charge $25 a session, and sessions go anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, depending on how long we need to work together that day. When making these videos, I try to choose topics that I deal with a lot personally. In today's video, I deal with quite a bit, but people don't talk about it, and that is incestual relationships. I'm going to start off by talking about the most talked about incestual relationships, and then move on to the most common incestual relationship that you may even be in yourself and not even realize that you're in it. So stick around to the end of this video. You're going to want to see this last one. Now, the most talked about form of incestual relationship that I personally deal with has to be incestual sexual abuse. Now, if you were sexually abused by a family member, more than likely you were groomed. You were groomed very early on. Your abuser could have started out by desensitizing you to touch. They do this by back rubs, foot rubs that eventually lead to rubbing around toward your breast or up your leg or your thigh. They can also do this through hugs that go on for way too long, where your bodies are way too close and it can feel very uncomfortable. There are many ways that your abusers will desensitize you to touch. In some cases, you also have children that have been sexually abused that they felt like the sexual abuse was pleasurable. And there are kids that have a lot of guilt for this, even adults that still struggle with this. And one thing I want to say is, if you were sexually abused by a family member and you found it pleasurable, this is nothing more than the brain's response to stimuli that was pleasurable. This doesn't mean that you enjoyed it or that you even wanted it. Then you have your more rare cases where you have a child that is the one initiating the sexual relationship. I personally have only seen this one time, and I will say it was extremely disturbing. I watched the child sit on her father's lap with his legs open. His hands were on her hips. It was very inappropriate, and he would rub her leg and her back, and the whole time he's sitting there with his legs wide open and she is on his penis. This is inappropriate. I don't care how close a father and daughter are. It is not okay to sit your daughter between your legs and rub on her hips and thighs, even if the daughter is allowing it and the one initiating it, because you are the parent. And if you're allowing this to go on and you're feeding into it, then clearly there is an issue with you as well. You can also have consensual incestual relationship where the parent and the child are both involved and both consensual because they are both of age. This isn't as common either, but I did see a case where mother and son fell in love, were getting married, and planning on having children. So now that you know what incestual sexual relationship looks like, let's talk about the psychology behind it. A lot of times, the sexual incestual abuse was generational, meaning granddad touched his daughter, and then mother touched her son or daughter, and then now the son or daughter is touching their children. And this goes on from generation to generation because you were never taught boundaries. You were not taught it's not okay for a family member to touch me. In other cases where the child is initiating the relationship, this often happens because the child was very deprived of affection from the parent or even being noticed by the parent. And so they feel like if they sexualize themselves, they notice that now they get more of the parent's attention. And again, these children were not taught boundaries. They were not taught it's inappropriate that mom or dad touches me. So now this teen or even adult child that is desperate for the caregiver's love and attention may not view this as inappropriate, rather fulfilling in some type of way. Now let's talk about the most common form of incest, incestual fantasy. In the porn industry, incestual porn is the third most searched out, getting millions of views every single day. 50% out of Pornhub videos are incestual, and 1 out of every 3 of these are violent or forceful. I want to say that just because you watch incestual porn, this does not make you incest. A lot of people that watch this type of porn will tell me, I don't know why I watch that. I feel disgusted after, especially if it's one where someone's being raped or sexually assaulted. So why do so many people watch incestual porn? First, if you were sexually abused as a child, this sets up the sexual template for your brain. So the very thing that hurt you and damaged you can now turn you on. This is nothing to be ashamed of. It doesn't mean that you like the abuse or that you even wanted it to happen. And if you want to, you can work through these things. Another reason, this type of porn desensitizes you to what happened to you. And the third reason, if you watch the same type of porn day after day after day, and you watch a lot of porn, you can become very bored with this. And you may no longer be able to become aroused or have an orgasm. So now you search out videos that allude to illegal or societal taboo. Now let's talk about the most damaging and difficult to overcome, in my opinion, the one that you may be in yourself and not even realize it: emotional incest. I'm going to break this up into 3 parts. First, we'll go over what emotional incest is, and then we'll talk about the signs that you might be in it yourself, and then we'll talk about how to break free from it if you are in an emotional incest relationship with a caregiver or parent. So what is emotional incest? Emotional incest is when a parent or a caregiver relies on a child for emotional support or for advice. The parent puts the child in the role of meeting their emotional needs, and this can feel very uncomfortable and unwanted by the child. Now, despite the name incest, this has nothing to do with anything sexual. You also see a lot of this in narcissistic parents, but it is not limited to narcissistic parents. You can see this in emotionally immature parents as well. Okay, let's go over some of the signs of emotional incest. These parents may talk to their children about their sex life, their partners, or their relationship problems with their partner. This means they can talk to their children about how often they have sex, the lack of sex in their relationship. They can talk to the children about sexual experiences. But regardless, no child wants their parent to talk to them about their sex life, period, ever. It is highly inappropriate to communicate with your child about your sex life. They may put all their financial problems on you. They can call you up anytime they need money. They can call you up every time they're stressed over money, but they're relying on you now to be their caregiver. These parents will guilt you for having a life outside of them and friends outside of the home or family. They will destroy your friendships or your relationships so they have more time with you. They will discourage you moving out of town or moving away from them. They may give their children drugs or alcohol and treat them as their best friend. Another reason parents give their children drugs and alcohol is they'll tell them, well, you can do it here, but you can't do it outside of here. That is another way of keeping that child in the home. Now I'm relying on you to get high. They come to you for comfort or support when something's going wrong in their life. I can't stress this enough. Children are not emotionally mature, and especially teenagers struggle enough to deal with their own emotions and to navigate through that confusing world. So for a parent to then put their emotions and their concerns and worries up on a child, it is too much for a child. You do not go to a child with your problems. They overshare, leaving the child feeling uncomfortable. They may take on responsibilities that are not age appropriate just to maintain peace with the parent. You may feel guilt, having anxiety and depression. You feel responsible for the parent's emotions, which can put a strain on your relationship with your siblings or the other parent. You give up your wants and your needs to make the parent happy. You can have eating disorders, low self-esteem, or self-harm. Okay, I want to side note real quick. I have so many children that I come across, teenagers that are self-harming, and the parents are well aware the children are self-harming and they don't get them help. If you have a child that self-harms, they do this for one or two reasons. One, they feel like they deserve the pain. Two, their pain is so severe and so deep and so heavy, they feel the only way to ease it is by harming themselves. Whatever their reason for self-harming is, it still lets you know they are enduring a tremendous amount of pain and they need help working through this. Most parents that I deal with ignore this in their children. Do not ignore it if your child is self-harming. They can't navigate through them themselves and they need help. And a lot of children, and I have seen this before, children that are self-harming that end up being rushed to the hospital because they've cut a main vein in their wrist and now they're bleeding out. This is very dangerous. Don't ignore it if you have a child that is self-harming. You have poor boundaries because you were never allowed to have them with your parent, and if you tried, you were guilted or even punished for them. You were groomed for this relationship. Now, this next thing I'm going to say, most people do this and they're not even aware of it. When you have a child, a small child, and you say something like, come here and give me a hug or give me a kiss, and they say no when they walk off, and your response is to be like, why don't you love me? Please give me a hug. And you sit there and you cry and you fake it, and the baby or the small child comes back and they hug you. You're teaching this child early on, you hurt me, you made me cry. You don't get to have boundaries. If you have boundaries, then I'm going to guilt you for them to get what I need and I want. You're grooming this child by doing these things and telling them you're responsible for my emotions. The child feels guilt, comes back, gives you a hug or kiss or whatever you're asking of them. This is not okay. And most people do this harmlessly, but it's not okay. You're setting this child up to take care of your emotions. You put your needs aside to meet theirs. Your parent may have experienced loss, divorce, or have a major fear of abandonment. The parent may share their deepest secrets that are way too heavy for a child. I heard one person say that they had a miscarriage, and then the parent was like, I need to tell you something that I've never told anyone, and you can never tell anyone. And goes on to tell about how she lost a child. This was an adult at the time, and he said this was too much for him. Not everyone is emotionally mature and can handle things like that. I strongly believe before you drop anything heavy on anyone, you should always ask them, are you at an emotionally healthy place where I can share this with you and you can handle it? Because most people just overshare and they pour everything out on someone else without even asking, are you at a place where you can handle what's going on with me? Most children are not there. They can't handle it. They are not emotionally mature enough to handle your secrets and shouldn't be required to keep them. The parent gets jealous of your relationship with other adults. They expect the child to compliment or praise them. The child has no privacy, and the parent may make inappropriate comments about the child's body. Now, this can be talking about how overweight the child is or how small or big their breasts are. Anything you say about the child's body that's inappropriate or makes a child feel uncomfortable. So now that you know the signs, if you are in an emotionally incest relationship with a parent or a caregiver, I now wrote down a list of why I believe this is the most difficult one to pull away from. First of all, you lose your sense of self to this parent. You are an extension of them, and individualization is punished and not accepted. This caregiver needs you to be who they want you to be. And if you try to be your own person and find your own way, they will sit there and tell you how all of it's wrong and their way is best, unless your way is making them look good. But by doing this, the child completely loses all sense of self. You are taught that your needs and your wants come last, so you carry this behavior with you throughout your life, always putting others first. Now, let me explain why this is such a bad thing. We are always taught, as women especially, that God comes first, then your spouse, then your children, and then you're down here somewhere. I couldn't disagree with this more. I do, however, believe that your higher power or God comes first, but then you, and then spouse, children, work, everything else comes after that. Because if I don't take time for me and I don't fill my cup, everyone else that comes to me for help or a need, I'm giving to them out of a depleted cup. But if I make sure I'm fulfilled and I take care of me first and I have my quiet time and I do things that make me happy so that I'm fulfilled, my cup is running over and I have plenty to give everyone else. And when you're giving from a depleted cup, you're giving out of resentment, you're angry, you're tired, you're moody with the kids. But when your cup is full and your needs are met, then you have plenty of you to give. When you are raised in a home where you're taught that you constantly give of yourself to this parent, you do this with everyone else for the rest of your life, putting yourself last and resenting everyone else for it. As an adult, you feel responsible for everyone else's emotions, and you may even find yourself constantly apologizing when there's no need for you to be sorry. This could mean you're in Walmart and you're about to turn down an aisle and a lady comes out of the aisle and cuts you off, and you look at her and apologize. You can look at her and say, "Excuse me," and go on past, but you have no reason to say sorry when you didn't do anything wrong. And often you see this in adults in these types of relationships, constantly apologizing for everything. And it's really bad when it goes into your relationship, because now you're taking most of the blame for what's going on in your marriage or your partnership and constantly apologizing for it. You become a people pleaser. You may have alternating feelings of love and hate for this parent. You have guilt over the feelings that you have toward the parent. You're extremely codependent with the parent. You feel like walking away from the parent isn't an option for you, or it's going to be extremely difficult for you. So now that you have an understanding of what emotional incest looks like and the effect that it can have on your life, what can you do about it if you notice you're in this type of relationship with a parent or caregiver? The first thing you're going to do is begin to set boundaries with the parent or the caregiver. This is crucial. And you can't just set a boundary. There has to be a consequence in place if they don't stick to this boundary. So most people will say, "Well, I gave them a boundary. I told them not to do this." Well, what was your follow-up? When they continuously violate the boundary, how did you follow up? What was the consequence? So set a boundary in place. Communicate that boundary with the parent or the caregiver. Let them know what the consequences will be and firmly stick to those. The second thing you can do is begin to put a little bit of distance between yourself and the parent or the caregiver. This could mean doing more things alone with self, spending more time with your children or your spouse or even friends, but do something to put a little bit more distance, even if that means just taking fewer phone calls, but begin adding some distance between yourself and the parent. If you feel you can't walk away from this parent because you're in a trauma-bonded relationship, and if you're not sure what a trauma-bonded relationship looks like, I have a video on this as well. Go back and watch that video on trauma bond. If you are aware of what trauma bond is and you feel like you are in a trauma-bonded relationship with this parent, You've got to begin to tear free from the trauma bond. I've also posted a video on how to break free from trauma bond. There's steps in there that will guide you through this. There's also other countless videos out there on how to break free from trauma bond, but you've got to start working on that. Also, if you notice that you're in this type of relationship with a parent, an emotionally incest relationship, you may need to seek out help from a life coach or from a therapist. But these relationships can be very difficult to break away from. And sometimes there's so much guilt with it because there is a parent, and there's so much confusion with it because it's a parent. You may really need help getting out of this type of relationship and healing from it. When I originally wrote out this video, I wasn't going to cover this next part because I feel like it would be very controversial. However, because I do have people that have came to me and that have struggled with this, I feel like I need to add it as well. So let's talk about same-sex incestual relationships. If you are homosexual and you are in a relationship with a cousin, there are a few reasons behind this. If you are in a family that is just so enmeshed and entangled and cult-like that you don't get outside of the family much, there's not a lot of outsiders coming in, you're not around a lot of other people, you can begin to start to fall for the people that you're around day after day after day after day. Especially, again, if you are not taught boundaries with family. Another reason this happens is, let's say your cousin has all the same neglectful, narcissistic traits that your neglectful, narcissistic parent had, and they mistreat you and neglect you the same way. The cousin reminds you of the parent that you've been trying to get to love you, and you develop feelings for this person. Not anyone that ever reaches out to me for help, I'm always open-minded to anything that is presented to me, and I do not judge it. I feel like I can't effectively help you if I'm judging you. So I have to be judgment-free with anyone that I work with. So when this was presented to me several times, actually, with, I don't know how to feel about this. I'm sleeping with a family member. I feel guilt for it, but I don't know why it's wrong. I really had to give this some thought. And if you view things as I do, that there is no right or wrong, there's nothing more than people's perception, I began to think, what is my perception on this? If you are a homosexual and you are in a relationship with a cousin, even if you're in a heterosexual relationship and it is family, and the female has had a hysterectomy, there's no way she can get pregnant, period. Or you're in a homosexual relationship with a family member where you clearly can't have children, and you live in a state where this is legal, I can't give any reason why this is so-called wrong that isn't going to be an opinion. So, with that being said, if this is the type of relationship you're in and it makes you happy and it's not hurting you or the other person, there's no children involved, and it's completely legal, then go on and do you. However, if any of these other incestual relationships apply to you, this isn't okay, and you may need to get help recovering from these. And there is nothing to be ashamed of in that.